Savannah was born and raised in Richmond, Kentucky, a small town where everybody knew everyone, and news traveled almost faster than the wind. From her earliest years, people who met her described her as bright, energetic, and full of life. She grew up with a kind of spark that made her unforgettable, the kind of young woman who could light up any room she walked into. Teachers admired her determination, neighbors adored her friendliness, and her friends relied on her for laughter and warmth. But behind her joyful personality, life was never as simple or carefree as she made it appear. Savannah carried responsibilities far heavier than anyone her age should have had to bear. Her parents divorced when she was young, creating emotional fractures that continued into her teenage years. And though she worked hard to stay strong, the weight of family conflict and a shaky relationship with her father left deep marks that shaped her adult life in painful ways. Her father, in particular, cast a long shadow over her. Their relationship was strained, complicated by his belief that Savannah should remain financially dependent on him. He thought he was protecting her, but she saw it as control. She was determined to build her own life, stand on her own feet, and give her children the stability she never fully had. She refused to be trapped under anyone's authority, even if that person was her own parent. This determination followed her into high school, where she studied hard, worked part-time jobs, and refused to crumble under pressure. After graduating, she attended Western Kentucky University, driven to create a better future for herself. Even then, she carried more weight than most. Life tested her again when she became a young mother, not once, but twice, each time finding herself abandoned by men who had promised commitment but never showed up when their presence mattered most. By the time she was in her early 20s, Savannah was raising 2 boys entirely on her own. She juggled motherhood, work, and her education with a level of strength that few people ever truly recognized. And then came another twist: twins. Suddenly she had 3 children depending on her every day. No partner. No reliable support. Every diaper, every doctor's appointment, every school supply list, every midnight cry, she handled it alone. The stress was relentless. Sleep was rare. Moments of peace were even rarer. But through it all, Savannah kept smiling for her kids, determined not to let them feel the chaos of her world. She poured every ounce of love she had into raising them, even though she had almost nothing left for herself. Her life became a routine of survival. Wake up, work, take care of the children, try to keep food on the table, then repeat. Working at a hotel gave her just enough income to keep the household running, but the job was tiring and the hours unpredictable. Still, Savannah pushed through, driven by the image of the future she wanted for her children. Yet deep down, she longed for a break, just one moment to breathe, think, and reconnect with herself. So when her mother offered to watch the kids for a weekend, it felt like a miracle. Savannah finally had a chance to rest, reset, and maybe remember what it felt like to be more than just a provider and reminder of responsibility. Around that same time, some of her old school friends reached out, inviting her to a girls' night out. A night to laugh, relax, and pretend, just for a few hours, that life wasn't as heavy as it truly was. She hesitated for a moment but eventually said yes. She needed this. The night of the outing arrived, and Savannah dressed in something simple yet beautiful, a reflection of her personality. She joined her group of friends at a bar in Richmond. At first, everything felt light-hearted. There were jokes, shared memories, and laughter echoing across their table like the old days. For the first time in a long while, Savannah loosened her shoulders, allowed herself to smile freely, and took a break from the weight that constantly lingered behind her eyes. The drinks flowed, the conversations deepened, and time slipped by unnoticed. But like many reunions that bring together old wounds and old personalities, tension eventually emerged. Savannah found herself in a heated argument with one of the girls. No one knows what sparked it, but the disagreement quickly intensified. Voices were raised. Words were thrown. Pride took over. Finally, the other girl stormed out, leaving behind a ripple of discomfort. Savannah stayed behind at the bar. The mood had shifted, but she didn't want the night to end on a sour note. Maybe she needed more time to unwind. Maybe she didn't want to return home still carrying the anger from the argument. Maybe she just needed one more moment to herself. She returned to her bar stool, ordered more drinks, and tried to drown the tension with alcohol. She sat alone, sipping slowly, staring at the glowing lights behind the bar as if they held answers to all the questions she never dared ask. The clock ticked past midnight, past 1, past 2. Finally, at around 2:45 a.m., she picked up her phone and called her mother. Her voice was slightly tired, slightly slurred, but still filled with warmth. "I'm on my way," she said. Those 4 simple words would become the last her family would ever hear from her. CCTV cameras captured Savannah leaving the bar shortly after the phone call. She stepped into the quiet night, the streets nearly empty, the city lights reflecting off her tired eyes. Moments later, 3 men appeared on camera, walking behind her. At first, nothing looked unusual. It could have been coincidence. 2 of the men eventually split off in different directions, leaving only one continued path, one man walking steadily toward where Savannah had gone. The camera footage showed the man catching up to her. The 2 exchanged a few words. They appeared calm, no signs of confrontation, no obvious distress. Then they walked away together, disappearing into the night. That was the last time anyone saw Savannah alive. The next morning, when her mother's repeated calls went unanswered, fear began to creep in. A mother always knows. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. Her mother tried calling again and again, but Savannah's phone rang with no response. At first she hoped her daughter had simply overslept or misplaced her phone, but the sinking feeling in her chest refused to quiet down. Eventually, she contacted the police. The officers took the report seriously. Savannah wasn't the type to disappear without contacting her family. They quickly traced her last known location, obtained permission to review the bar's CCTV footage, and began piecing together the final hours of her night. When they saw the unknown man walking away with her, suspicion immediately formed. Who was he? Why was he with her? Where did they go after they left the camera's frame? Investigators froze frames, enhanced images, and began their search. 2 of the men seen behind her were identified quickly and questioned, but their accounts pointed toward one disturbing name, David. David became the focal point of the investigation. The identified men claimed he was the last person seen walking with Savannah. They described him casually as someone they recognized from the area, a man who lived in Lexington, about 40 minutes away. Police wasted no time. They tracked him down, visited his residence, and began asking questions. David claimed innocence. He said he didn't know what happened to her after they walked together. Detectives searched his home, his car, and the surrounding area, but found nothing incriminating. There were no signs of struggle, no suspicious stains, no belongings of Savannah's. Still, the officers sensed that David wasn't telling the whole truth. His demeanor was inconsistent, calm in some moments, evasive in others. And although there was no physical evidence tying him conclusively to her disappearance, the gut feeling shared by investigators was unmistakable. Something wasn't right. Days turned into weeks. The investigation stretched on with no breakthrough, leaving the community uneasy and Savannah's family drowning in uncertainty. Rumors circulated. People whispered theories. Some hoped she had simply walked away to clear her mind, but deep down, most feared the truth was darker. Detectives revisited old interviews, rechecked collected evidence, and monitored David closely. During a follow-up interrogation, they noticed something that changed everything. David kept receiving text messages during questioning. He seemed nervous, glancing at his phone repeatedly. One of the messages referenced Savannah. The content was vague, but suspicious enough that investigators' instincts flared. Why was he talking about her now? And to whom? This moment became the turning point. The next morning, David's father, while mowing the yard outside their home, made a discovery so horrific that it sent shockwaves through the entire investigation and shattered any remaining hope. As David's father pushed the mower across a corner of the yard, something unusual caught his eye, something partially exposed in the disturbed soil. At first, he thought it might be an animal, perhaps something the family dog had unearthed. But the closer he stepped, the more dread rose inside him. A human hand. Pale. Still. Unmistakably wrong. His knees nearly buckled as horror washed over him. He immediately shut off the mower and backed away, trembling. He didn't touch anything. He didn't dig further. He simply called the police with a shaky voice that barely formed sentences. Within minutes, officers arrived and secured the area. Forensic teams were summoned. The yard was taped off, cameras rolled, and neighbors gathered in silent disbelief. The discovery was grim, heartbreaking, and unmistakable. DNA tests would later confirm the truth, but even before the results came back, investigators knew. They had found Savannah, and the case had turned from a missing persons investigation into something far darker. The confirmation sent waves of grief through Richmond and Lexington. News spread fast. Savannah's remains had been found buried in the backyard of the man last seen walking with her. The community reacted with shock, fury, and deep sadness. Vigils began forming. Candles flickered in front yards. Her family collapsed into grief that words could never describe. Investigators immediately brought David in once again, but this time, it wasn't for questioning, it was for arrest. The evidence was now undeniable. His calm facade quickly cracked. Gone was the collected demeanor he had shown before. Now he appeared anxious, jittery, unable to maintain eye contact. Detectives pressed him hard, presenting the reality of what had been found. Still, he deflected, dodged, denied. He insisted he had no knowledge of how Savannah ended up buried behind his home. But the silence between each of his answers spoke louder than any words. In the days that followed, forensic teams worked tirelessly to gather more evidence from the property. Soil samples were analyzed. Tools from the shed were examined. Search dogs combed through every inch of land. Meanwhile, detectives dug deeper into David's past, interviewing acquaintances, co-workers, former neighbors. A pattern began to emerge. Stories of erratic behavior, troubling comments, and a history of unpredictable emotional outbursts. Nothing had been severe enough to place him on law enforcement radar before, but in hindsight, many people admitted they felt something off about him. Prosecutors built their case meticulously, assembling a timeline so detailed that it left little room for doubt. David's phone records, movements, and alibis all pointed to guilt. Slowly, the truth began to tighten around him like a vice. And though he continued insisting innocence, even he seemed to realize the walls were closing in. Then, in a surprising turn, David requested a meeting with his lawyer. After hours behind closed doors, something shifted. The next morning, in a tense courtroom filled with reporters, grieving family members, and community members seeking answers, David entered and pleaded guilty. It was a moment that stunned everyone. His admission, however, did not bring clarity. He refused to offer an explanation. No motive, no details, no timeline. He simply acknowledged responsibility for Savannah's death and the concealment of her remains. The absence of answers deepened the heartbreak. Her family wanted to understand what happened, why it happened, and whether she had suffered. But those questions remained locked behind David's silence. The judge sentenced him to 50 years in prison, a decision met with both relief and sorrow. Justice had been served, but closure remained painfully out of reach. Even after the sentencing, investigators continued piecing together Savannah's last hours. The footage of her leaving the bar, the moment she encountered David, the path they walked, every second was analyzed repeatedly. Friends of Savannah replayed the night in their minds, wondering whether they could have prevented the tragedy. Her mother battled overwhelming guilt for letting her daughter go out that night, even though she knew deep down it wasn't her fault. Grief has a cruel way of twisting what ifs into unbearable weight. Counselors were brought in to support the surviving children as the community rallied around them. Donations poured in, local churches offered childcare assistance, and neighbors delivered meals. Pain may break people, but it also has a strange way of uniting them. Still, nothing erased the reality. 3 children would grow up without their mother, robbed of the warmth she fought so hard to give them. Savannah's funeral drew one of the largest gatherings Richmond had seen in years. People who barely knew her came to pay their respects, moved by the tragedy that had unfolded so close to home. Photos of her smiling, laughing, holding her children, and celebrating birthdays lined the walls. Her life, though difficult, had been filled with love and vibrancy. As her mother stood beside the casket, she whispered apologies through tears, promising to raise the children with the strength and tenderness Savannah had shown every day. The service was emotional, heartbreaking, and deeply reflective. Pastors spoke about the fragility of life, the unpredictability of danger, and the importance of community protection. But what struck people most was the uncomfortable truth. Savannah did nothing wrong. She simply went out for a night with friends. She trusted the world around her. And she crossed paths with the wrong person at the wrong time. Long after the funeral, the investigation remained a topic of discussion. Many people in the community continued to question the events of that night. How did Savannah and David interact at the bar? Why did she walk with him? Did she feel unsafe at any point? Some believed David had targeted her intentionally, while others speculated their encounter was spontaneous but turned violent. Without a confession, speculation grew into endless theories. Law enforcement released a few details, but much remained sealed in case files. What was known for certain was chilling enough. Savannah had left the bar alive, talked to David willingly, and never returned home. That sequence alone was enough to haunt parents, friends, and young women throughout the region. Many began taking additional precautions when going out at night, realizing how quickly a sense of safety can shatter. Savannah's children, too young to fully understand, were left with questions their caregivers struggled to answer. Family members described the older boys asking when their mother would come back and why she wasn't calling them anymore. The twins, only infants, would grow up learning about her through stories, photos, memories, and the gentle words of those who loved her most. Their lives would always be shaped by the loss of a mother who fought endlessly to give them a better future. Through fundraisers and community support, a trust was created for their long-term care, ensuring they would never lack basic needs. Still, no amount of money could replace the warmth of a mother's touch or the sound of her laughter. Their future would be forever marked by the tragedy of one night, one decision, one encounter, one irreversible moment. Meanwhile, discussions grew louder across Kentucky about the safety of bars, nightlife culture, and the vulnerability of women walking alone at night. Community leaders pushed for better street lighting, more surveillance cameras, and expanded escort services for late-night workers and bargoers. Some local establishments even started offering safe walk programs, where staff members ensured customers reached their cars or rides safely. Advocacy groups used Savannah's story as a rallying cry, demanding more resources for missing person investigations and faster intervention protocols. While these changes brought a sense of progress, they also served as painful reminders of what had already been lost. Every improvement, every new initiative, was rooted in a tragedy that should never have happened. Yet, from this loss, communities hoped to create a safer environment that would prevent similar tragedies in the future. Over time, journalists and true crime enthusiasts began covering Savannah's story. Articles were written, podcasts recorded, and documentaries produced. Some of these accounts focused on the investigation, others on the emotional impact her death left on the community. With each retelling, awareness grew, but so did frustration, because despite the guilty plea, many critical questions remained unanswered. The lack of explanation about what happened during Savannah's final hours left a void that no amount of reporting could fill. Her case became a reminder of the limits of justice. A person can be convicted, a sentence can be delivered, but closure is not guaranteed. Her story was not just a crime, it was a profound tragedy that exposed vulnerabilities in everyday life. People began seeing themselves, their daughters, their sisters, and their friends in Savannah's final moments. As the years passed, Savannah's family worked tirelessly to keep her memory alive. They organized annual remembrance events where people gathered to release lanterns into the sky. Each lantern represented a wish for peace, justice, and healing, not only for Savannah's loved ones but for all families who had lost someone to violence. These events brought comfort, unity, and a sense of purpose. They reminded the community that Savannah was not just a victim. She was a mother, a daughter, a friend, a young woman with dreams and struggles. Her life mattered. Her voice mattered. Her story mattered. And even though the pain remained, her family refused to let her legacy fade into the shadows of tragedy. They spoke her name loudly, proudly, and continually, ensuring she would never be forgotten. One of the most powerful outcomes of Savannah's story was the rise of self-defense awareness programs in the region. In collaboration with local police departments, community centers began offering classes teaching young women strategies for recognizing danger, escaping threats, and trusting their instincts. The message was not about blaming victims, because Savannah had done nothing wrong, but about empowering individuals in a world where unpredictability was real. These classes grew in popularity, extending to college campuses, high schools, and workplaces. Survivors of violence came forward to speak, sharing their experiences to help others. Savannah's story became a catalyst for education, transformation, and renewed vigilance. Even amid heartbreak, her legacy created ripples of protection across the community. Still, for those closest to Savannah, healing was not linear. Her mother carried the heaviest grief of all. Some days she found strength in caring for her grandchildren, telling them stories of their mother's kindness, humor, and resilience. Other days, the weight of loss felt unbearable. She replayed the night of the girls' outing over and over, wishing she could go back, wishing she had urged Savannah to stay home, even though she knew those thoughts were irrational. Grief doesn't follow logic, it simply exists, raw and unapologetic. Counseling helped, but the ache never disappeared. What comforted her most was the knowledge that Savannah's life continued to inspire others, that her story was a reminder to the world that every moment of vulnerability matters, and every life deserves protection. Despite the tragedy, Some community members found hope in the unity that followed. Neighbors became closer. Families became more protective. Friends checked in on each other more often. Churches opened their doors to host support groups for grieving mothers and families affected by violence. The collective response showed that even in darkness, humanity could shine through. People honored Savannah by fostering a culture of awareness and compassion. They pushed for policy changes, better investigative protocols, and increased funding for missing person cases, knowing that every improvement could save another life. Her story served as a reminder that danger often hides in plain sight, and that prevention requires vigilance from everyone, not just law enforcement. Meanwhile, David remained in prison, serving his 50-year sentence. He rarely spoke about the case, and corrections staff noted that he kept to himself, avoiding interactions with other inmates. Some believed he carried guilt, others thought he was simply avoiding confrontation. Regardless, his silence continued to haunt the case. Without a confession or clear motive, the truth about what happened that night may never be fully known. But while he lived behind bars, Savannah's family faced a different kind of sentence, one of lifelong loss. Their grief would not end in 50 years. Their healing would not come with a parole hearing. Their pain was permanent, etched into the history of their family and their town. In the years following the tragedy, Richmond sought to create safer environments for women and vulnerable individuals. Local bars adopted stricter ID checks, trained staff to identify signs of distress, and implemented Ask for Angela programs allowing customers to discreetly signal if they felt unsafe. Rideshare companies partnered with bars to provide discounted late-night rides. Street cameras were upgraded to enhance clarity and coverage. These changes did not erase what had happened, but they provided reassurance. People felt safer walking at night, knowing the community had taken meaningful steps. Social media movements emerged as well, urging people to travel in groups, share their locations with trusted friends, and remain alert. Savannah's name became a symbol of awareness, a reminder that tragedies demand change, not silence. For the children, growing up without their mother shaped their identities in deep ways. Family members described how the older boys occasionally asked about her, seeking details not from a place of pain, but from longing. They wanted to know what she was like, what made her laugh, what dreams she held for them. The twins learned about her through gentle stories, birthday traditions, and the photographs displayed throughout the home. Milestones, the first day of school, birthdays, graduations, always carried an extra layer of emotion. Her mother attended every event with pride and sadness intertwined, knowing Savannah should have been there. The family worked tirelessly to ensure the children never felt unloved, reminding them that their mother's spirit lived on through them. As the story spread online, countless people commented about how easily the same thing could happen to anyone. A simple night out, a walk outside, a brief interaction with a stranger. Many women shared their own near-miss experiences, emphasizing how fragile safety can be. This collective realization sparked a nationwide conversation about the importance of personal safety tools, bystander intervention, and protective habits. It wasn't fear-mongering, it was awareness. Savannah's story became a powerful example used by safety advocates, educators, and even police departments to highlight the hidden dangers that can arise in everyday situations. Her tragedy inspired thousands to be more cautious, more observant, and more prepared. Ultimately, Savannah's story stands as a heartbreaking reminder of life's fragility. She was a young woman balancing responsibility and hope, doing her best to raise her children while holding on to glimpses of joy wherever she could find them. She didn't go looking for danger. She didn't take unnecessary risks. She simply went out for a night meant to relieve stress. But in a moment of vulnerability, she crossed paths with someone who saw an opportunity to harm. Her story teaches us to trust our instincts, protect one another, and recognize warning signs. Yet, it also reminds us that even the most vigilant person cannot control every situation. That's why communities must remain united, proactive, and committed to safety for all. Savannah's life was full of struggle, love, sacrifice, and determination. Her death was a devastating loss not just for her family, but for an entire community that mourned a bright soul taken far too soon. Though justice was served, her absence is felt every day by the children she adored and the mother who cherished her. Her story continues to echo, urging us to stay alert, stay aware, and look out for one another, because danger often hides in plain sight, and safety is something we must work together to protect. So remember Savannah. Honor her by choosing caution, kindness, and vigilance. Speak up when something feels wrong. Support those who feel unsafe. And never underestimate the power of a single moment to change everything. Say no to crime. Stay alert. Stay safe. And I'll see you in the next one.